Euzubillahimineşşeytanirracim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi şrah li sadri ve yessir li emri. Vehlul ukdeden min lisani yefkahu kavli. Selamun aleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuh.
Reading from the 24th word, the third branch, and we are at the conclusion of this third branch. And we had been going through principles of reading a hadith, and inshallah, this seems like it's the conclusion of the 10th principle, rather. So I can start reading, but before I do, if anyone wants to, if not done already, provide a quick summary of maybe last week, that would be delightful. Aha, Abdurrahman, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. So I don't think I can give a summary, but so from the last week, what we something that had caught my attention, and I even took a couple notes about it, was this idea. We were talking about the droplet and the sea, and how in nature they are the same, but they differ in their quality, or they differ in the capacity of how much they can accept, or how much they can reflect of the light, you could say in some way. So the way, the emphasis was made on the fact that they are accepting things. They are reflecting what is being given. So the droplet is reflecting the sun. At the same time, the sea is reflecting the sun, but the sea is much more open to reflecting it. The sea is much more transparent, let's say, or it's much wider in that sense. And because of that, it reflects more. So there's this quality of accepting things, of we only can reflect. We cannot earn things. We don't earn them. We don't gain them. We don't somehow make them. We reflect the things that are given to us. So we are accepting things. So we need to be accepting to the merits, let's say, that are within the verses, the merits that are within the different hadiths that the Prophet says, that we were studying last week. And yeah, that was just my story. And I guess as a final thing, it's as much as you can open yourself up to accepting, or reflecting these merits, that your actions will gain value, your actions will benefit you. And as much as you can open yourself up this way, maybe let's say Laylatul Qadr in Ramadan, that one night, wherever you find it, it might be very beneficial to you. If you can, that one night could be so beneficial if you approach it in the correct way, as the atom that is transparent and that reflects and that only knows that it accepts things that are given to it.
Thank you for that wonderful reflection and summary, and also in bringing it into relation with Ramadan. I think, just as a side note, every night can be Laylatul Qadr if we are open to receiving the revelation in the universe and ourselves. Okay, so we can inshallah start reading from the conclusion. And with your help, I'll moderate. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Conclusion. O unfair, unthinking, self-centered, cavilling man whose belief is weak and philosophy strong. Consider these 10 principles. Then do not make the pretext a narration you thought was contrary to the truth and definitely opposed to reality, and point the finger of objection at hadiths, thus casting aspersions on the noble messenger's, peace be upon him, sinlessness. Because, firstly, these 10 principles and what they entail will make you forego denial. They say, if there is any real fault, it is ours. It may not be referred to the hadiths. Firstly, these 10 principles and what they entail will make you forego denial. They say, if there is any real fault, it is ours. It may not be referred to the hadiths. They say, too, if the fault is not real, it springs from your misunderstanding. In short, if one embarks on denial and rejection, one first has to deny these 10 principles and show them to be false. If one embarks on denial and rejection, one first has to deny these 10 principles and show them to be false. Now, if you are fair, after pondering over these 10 principles with due attention, do not attempt to deny a hadith your reason considers contrary to the truth. Say, there is either an explanation, an interpretation, or an exegesis of this, and do not criticize it. So, he's, I guess, in a sense, summarizing the purpose of sharing the 10 principles thus far, which is to keep in check, I guess, sometimes, at least my initial impulse, perhaps, to cast aside what I can't make sense of. There is either an explanation, interpretation, or an exegesis of this. And I guess the attitude sometimes that comes from this sort of criticism is one of unfairness, not thinking or reflecting enough. And of course, he's using philosophy in a very particular way here, more of like having a sort of ideological stance, I would assume, beforehand, before even approaching what it is that is in front of you. Does anyone have anything to say about the conclusion? I mean, I don't have much. We can continue with the 11th principle, but it would be nice to hear a remark or two before we do so, just to kind of let the text seep in a little bit more. I'll pause for a moment. Okay. Great. Okay, Brother Birkan, please go ahead.
Sorry for last moment. I'm just having difficulty using the tablet. One thing which I was reading again, and it says, and point the finger of objection at hadith, thus casting aspersions on the noble messenger's sinlessness. Sinlessness, I don't know what it entails exactly, so to be honest, but the way I understand it, this within this context is talking about that no matter what he does, no matter what he says, you can always benefit from it. There is no harm in it. There is no mistake in it. There is no, how would you translate günah?
Sin?
Yes, okay. There is no sinless sin, okay. There is no sin in it. As it, look at you, meaning he's a source of guidance in its full extent. There is no way that this source will take you astray. So this is what I understand from sinless within this context. I might be wrong. And he's saying that just because you didn't like some parts of hadith or one narration, anything, you're not sure about it, you didn't see it fitting the reality and so on, do not what is the word? Sorry. Do not make yourself suffer from, or do not make yourself, prevent yourself benefiting from such a source. So you may see something faulty, but don't forget, if you, claim it as a failure or claim it as a fault, just because, you didn't see the wisdom behind it at the first read, you actually making yourself suffer from lack of such a source that you can benefit. Don't do this to yourself. Don't take the idea of prophet, don't take idea of the notion of prophet from your life away. Don't take it away from your life just because something doesn't, seem right to you at first read. Try to understand it, spend some more time, he says at the end. They say there's either an explanation or an interpretation or an exegesis, tabir, of this, and do not criticize it. So know what is at stake. This is what I understand from, pointing finger to Prophet Hadith and then casting aspersion on noble Prophet.
Thank you, Brother Birkan, and I really like how you kind of offered your take on what it means for, let's say, the Prophet to be sinlessness for me, which is, as you said, no aspect in which there is no guidance. As in, to speak in less negative terms, there is always guidance in everything, if I can extract it. Brother Yusuf, please go ahead.
Yes, this sinlessness part is important. You can hear me, inshallah. So, the way that the verse that I am trying to remember how this sinlessness is being mentioned in the Quran. So there might be other verses, but the one that comes to my mind is actually it is one of the last revealed, in which the Creator says to the messenger, God will protect you from people. So the word protect in there is the same word that is used terminologically for sinlessness. So what is it that the messenger was protected from? So, and this is going to be related to sin. So he was like, I am in need of a teacher who shouldn't be deviated in any shape or form. He shouldn't be like any idea, because when we think about protection, we can think about, oh yeah, the messenger died in his bed. He didn't die in battlefield. He didn't die due to any sort of an attack. So he was protected. Okay, that's correct. But in another sense, the messenger was protected from any sort of interference from people to his message too. So he was protected in this regard, which boils down to what Brother Birkan was saying. Everything he says is a message to me, yes, but that also, how is that the case? So everything the message that he took was pure and clean. So this is the important part. And he understood that message properly as well. This is why when the author in here says, are you aware who you are trying to criticize? You're talking about a person who has the title of this sinlessness, but sinlessness is might be considered as not sure if it's a translation issue, but technically this is where the word is coming from. He was protected from people. And when this happens, I'm checking myself. Am I being protected by people? And I am seeing that I am under the influence of a lot of different ideologies. Just even going through the education system is enough to format my mindset according to a certain mindset of a group of earthly or worldly people, for example. So when the messenger is being protected from them, and I am criticizing or attempting to criticize the messenger with my mindset, which is influenced so much from the people who were maybe not worthy to be listened in the first place. So this is the first thing. The second one is in this paragraph, the author is questioning the attitude and saying that what makes you do such a thing? And he even starts with saying your belief is weak, your philosophy is strong. This is what makes you have the courage to, or attitude. This is at the very gist of your courage to criticize the messenger is. Your belief is weak, your philosophy is strong. We can talk about this, what this boils down to. But it also looks like this courageousness is related to me not understanding what sinlessness or a messenger being protected from man, what does it mean? Because since I don't see the importance of that, I ignore it. I simply feel like it doesn't mean anything. Even such a thing, even if it exists, such a thing exists, it doesn't mean anything to me. My understanding is mine. I am smart enough. I can figure out things by myself. Oh yeah, and this philosopher is even smarter than me, so let me go and learn from him. This would be my attitude. But as if the author is saying there's something wrong with your attitude in here. So I just wanted to underline these two things. First one, as Brother Birkan did, sinlessness. And the second one is, what is my attitude? What makes me in a very courageous way criticize the messenger?
Thank you. Yeah, I think especially in terms of the second point that you raised, in terms of my attitude, and I think there's this fine balance or medium one must find between the courage to criticize in an ideological way, that's one extreme, and then unrelenting submission to authority, which, let me rephrase that, submission without critical thought, I guess, because these are texts to be engaged with, to reflect over, to seek understanding from. So I do have to engage in a sort of dialectic with it. I have to ask it questions and see how it responds back to me and what I can extract from it. But with an open mind, I suppose, and with the awareness that I am coming with a lot of baggage, as Brother Yusuf said, that I may not even be aware of just by virtue of having gone through whatever educational system I've gone through. Yeah, Brother Birkan, please.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just waiting. So sorry. So if you want to continue, please go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just filling up.
I always feel nervous when I raise my hand because people usually take it as he wants to talk right now. But anyway, so another point I want to make, which is related to, Yusuf, you want to speak? Go ahead. Is about what Aisha also just said. So how I'm going to approach when I'm reading this hadith? Yes, definitely. I cannot just say that, okay, this is from Prophet was sinless, thus whatever I read has to be true. So definitely this is not the case. It shouldn't be the case. And all these 10 principles we studied, author actually said, like, not necessarily all of them are true, right? There are some sorts of noises, but there are also ways to get rid of this noise with proper methodology, with proper principles. He counted 10 of them so far. And he also says here, if there is any real fault, it is ours. So who says that? The principles. These 10 principles say if there's a real fault, it's because of us. Meaning, so in these 10 principles, authors studied different ways of, different reasons, let's say. The narration could be narrated in a, let's say, suboptimal way, or maybe it is narrated in a metaphorical sense, but you are reading it literally. So there might be some reasons for the fault that seeing it right now. So that might be the case that there is a real fault there, but it's not because of the narration itself. It is because how you read it or how it is narrated by whom it is narrated, so on and so forth. So there might be some fault, but don't take this fault as a fault of the prophet or fault of the narration itself. And also he says, or maybe there's no fault, but you see it as faulty. That is also the case. So there are some ways, if you say, like if we can say, there's a science of narration, he says, and you should take it serious. Just like you do your homework seriously when it comes to your homework at school, you do the same thing. Approach these hadith, approach these narrations by following their signs. Do not just say, no, I will read them and I will understand whatever I like. He says 2 chicken, I will take it as 2 chicken. There's no metaphor there. Don't do that. Stick to principles. And if there's a fault, it might be because of, as explained in principles, or it might be also, as Ashanur was saying, because you have some faults on your side. But again, don't forget what is at stake. You wouldn't want to lose such a source of guidance. So be serious.
Thank you for that comment. Yeah, I mean, I think that last sort of question you posed, rhetorical question you posed, is really important of what is at stake, What is the nature of the text that I'm dealing with? And that really, when I realize or when I reflect upon it, it's literally about my existence and this existence that, I find myself with and I'm trying to make sense of. And, it's not just sort of this critical thinking activity or side assignment, it's something very, very personal and close to home and something that should kind of shake sense into me in that, it is guidance that I am in need of and I want to benefit from. Thank you. All right. Well, if anyone else has any other thing to say, go ahead. If not, keeping in mind this conclusion and what we've talked about so far in the last half hour or so, I think we can continue on to the 11th principle. And also, as a side note, here is a principle of my own concerning my moderation, which is that if I call on you, it means that I have said what I had wanted to say. And if I have not yet called on you, even though you raise your hand, it means I have more to say and I will get to you. So raise and don't raise hands at your own ease and leisure. Okay. 11th principle, inshallah. First of all, let me see how long this 11th. Okay, it's a short one. Would anyone like to read the 11th principle to diversify the voices up here? Okay, all right, we'll just hear from me then. 11th principle. Just as the Quran has obscure verses which are in need of interpretation or else require absolute submission, hadiths also contain difficulties like the obscurities of the Quran. They are sometimes in need of extremely careful expounding and interpretation. The above examples may be sufficient for you. Yet someone who is awake interprets the dream of another who is sleeping. And sometimes one who is sleeping hears the words spoken by those near him who are awake, but gives them a meaning and interprets them in a way that applies to his own world of sleep. O man stupefied by the sleep of heedlessness and philosophy, do not deny in your dream what one saw, who manifested the meaning of, his eye never wavered nor did it swerve. And this is an ayah from chapter 53, verse 17. and my eye sleeps, but my heart sleeps not, which is a hadith. So let me start from the beginning of that sentence again. Do not deny in your dream what one saw, who manifested the meaning of, his eye never wavered, nor did it swerve, and my eye sleeps, but my heart sleeps not, and who was truly awake and aware, interpret it. Yes, if a mosquito bites someone who is asleep, he sometimes dreams that he has received terrible wounds in war, and this has a reality in sleep. If he was to be questioned, he would say, truly I have been wounded, guns and rifles were fired at me. Those sitting by him laugh at his anguish in sleep. Thus, the sleep-stained view of heedlessness and philosophical thought certainly cannot be the criterion for the truths of prophethood. So I've got some interesting stuff here. I think Nursi is offering a very interesting sort of analogy to make sense of the point he's trying to make. So first, if we go back to the beginning of this principle, he starts off by comparing, I guess, the science or methodology, perhaps, of reading hadith with the methodology and science of reading the Quran, which is that just as the Quran is in need of interpretation, hadith also needs to be interpreted and reflected upon and very carefully elucidated. So I'm not sure what before I go further, in that first sentence he's saying just as the Quran has obscure verses which are in need of interpretation or else require absolute submission. I mean, if I take out the part of the clause of the sentence, I can read it as just as the Quran has obscure verses which require absolute submission. So is he saying that, you know, there are two categories, either they are in need of interpretation or require absolute submission, but interpretation and absolute submission do not seem like things that are mutually exclusive, so I'm a little confused on that point of what he's trying to say, even though obviously that's not his main point. Yeah, Brother Yusuf, please.
For the first sentence, I guess it is more like there are some verses which require interpretation, and if you cannot interpret, you need to say that, okay, whatever Creator says must be correct, but I don't understand. So in this regard, what I understand, the submission is required. Well, in general, actually, I would like to pose a question. Can prophet be questioned? And I would like to separate this question from prophethood of a certain person. Questioning of that is something else. Like, is Muhammad is the prophet or not? This is another question. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, can prophet be questioned? And when I say question, of course, in order to understand something better, you ask questions. But not that form of a question I'm talking about. I'm talking about, well, what if that person is wrong anyways? Because if you know that that person must be right or must have truth or the truth, I'm going to use even that, although I know no created being can have the truth, but from any practical purpose of, as a human, me having access to truth of any shape or form, this a person who must have this title of prophet, can he fail? Or shall I have any sort of a question mark or a room to say that, well, he might have got it wrong. So what is this? What is the position of such a thing? Because he keep comparing it with philosopher, mind of a philosopher, this and that. For philosophers, I definitely have this. Like, any person is a philosopher in this regard. And yeah, people are fallible and people have their own limitations. But it looks like as if in here, he says, with the first sentence, as if it is being now applied to the Quran, he says either there are some verses obscure in the original text. He talks about mutashabihat, like which has, I mean, it's another discussion to say what is mutashabihat of Quran, what is muhkam mutashabih. This had been another issue, but the same would apply to the Quran as well. So is it like whatever is in Quran must be true, has to be true? Is this my, or whatever is speech of God has to be true from beginning to end? But to what extent I understand it is another issue. So just to make sure that I was able to convey my two questions properly, what would be the difference? This is another version of the same problem. What would be the difference between speech of God versus speech of a wise man? This is a question, one form of that question. Another form of question is, what is the difference between a man who is fitting into the title of prophet versus a man who is fitting into the title of a wise man? And from point of view of my attitude towards that person, what changes?
Okay, thank you for that comment, Brother Yusuf, and for those questions. Inshallah, they'll open up and enliven our discussion even more. Awesome. Was your question answered? I think what a thumbs up or a thumbs down would suffice. So this is what I took again from Brother Yusuf's question. One, of course, can a prophet be questioned? So doubted as well can be included in that perhaps, as well as what differentiates between the speech of a prophet versus a wise man. I guess also just okay, Awesome gives a check. You know, I guess another question that comes from that is, how is my approach to be different if I am approaching a wise man or a prophet? You know, and along with that approach comes, what are my expectations? What should be my expectations from either or? Yeah, these are great questions, and I just as a fun fact side note, I remember back in my early years of high school, I was talking with a teacher of mine about prophethood in Islam, and since I was an expert, and I just remember he said, I only have one question for you. And I was like, okay, yes, since I was so intent upon explaining him the glory of Islam. He said, can prophets make mistakes? Can they sin as well, in your Quran, in Islam? And from my own knowledge, I said, of course not. No, they can't. They're perfect. And all I remember is that he was so disappointed. I guess he wanted a human model that was to be guidance for him to be in many ways human like we are. But I don't know, that was just something that the question kind of made me recollect from years past by in my youth. Okay, I don't want to detract from the subject at hand. So the first question again, can a prophet be questioned? And what is the differentiating line between the speech of a prophet and that of a wise man? And in terms of the first question, Brother Yusuf was clarifying that he does not mean in terms of the prophethood of a certain person, but rather, can that prophet himself be questioned or doubted? I guess, those 2 points come hand in hand, because if I have verified or if I have concluded that the prophethood of a person is valid, then I can certainly question him or doubt him insofar as that question or doubt is one of a positive nature geared towards finding an answer from him, rather than questioning whether, there's any truth in it. I'm also thinking out loud, but if I take someone to be a prophet, then of course there's this sort of continuous journey of reconfirming through the speech, but also, at a certain stage, I may have to be open to the fact that there is guidance in whatever is being said, regardless of whether I intuitively or immediately can grasp it. So I can think on that further. Now, in terms of the second question, I think this is very, very interesting. The difference between speech of a prophet versus a wise man. When I think of a wise man, it's usually in terms of ethical behavior. And I think we turn prophets into worldly wise men that should offer us ethical behavior and morality and how to commune with each other in a community. But that, in a sense, secularizes the divine nature of the speech or the guidance that the prophet offers me. I know that doesn't also, there's more to the question for sure. I'm just sharing my initial intakes. All right, so I will be calling on the hands that I saw were up because I caught you guys. First, from memory of who talked first, who raised their hand first, I'm going to call on Abdurrahman first, and then we can hear from Brother Yusuf, inshallah.
Okay, I just want to add my own questions onto Brother Yusuf's questions. Or maybe I just want to dig deeper into what he's asking. Like just this idea, can a prophet ever be wrong? Can a prophet have flaws? And I'm thinking about this. As I'm thinking about this, I'm saying, well, I need to be able to question this prophet, or else I'll never come to that conclusion that he is a prophet. I need to somehow be able to just reason about his actions, his words, the way he's living, see if he can actually be a guide for me. So there is a questioning part that comes in there, which it's necessary. It's like very necessary for me. But then as it keeps going, because then, in this 11th principle, we're talking about these obscure verses in the Quran, which require interpretation or else absolute submission, or it says some hadiths are like this as well. So apparently there are things which I can't question, or there are things which I should be very careful to question because it's very obscure. It requires interpretation, or it requires some type of submission. I'm not sure what it means by absolute submission in this 11th principle. And I'm thinking, like, how am I supposed to go about this? And one thing to note is that this is the 11th principle. This is after the first 10 principles, which we're talking about all the different reasons, which you should first reason about the hadiths and try to make sense about them. So when it comes to the 11th principle, I guess it's also you should, he emphasized in the conclusion in the last principle how he made a conclusion there saying you should first question yourself. You should first see the fault in yourself. You should first, think about all these other many things that can happen or many reasons why you might not understand it correctly. And then he comes to this 11th principle where he's saying there are some verses which are just obscure and you're not it's hard to understand. There are some verses which just require absolute submission. And maybe one way to understand what he's saying here is that you need to not look at these verses in a narrow sense. You should not just what's the telescope into these verses or just zoom into them and forget about the rest of the other beliefs and convictions that you have. This prophet already has taken a place in your life, and he has some meaning for you, and up to the point that you've confirmed, he is your prophet. He is the one that is bringing a message for you. But then you see this message or you see this hadith which doesn't seem to make sense, or you just can't reason about it. And I think what he's saying is that just means that it's too obscure for you to understand, or it just requires just for now some submission to it. I would, however, add my own little condition here, which and I think he also touched on this in the earlier principles, where if there was no issue with this hadith or this verse, if there was no harm from it, if it didn't harm you, then just accept it, or just be patient with it, or just like, submit to it and be okay with it. So there's like this thing where, as long as this thing I'm hearing doesn't like completely like crumble or destroy all my pillars of belief and just my ideas of what the prophet is, who the prophet is, and just the truth that I do know, then I'll just leave it there on the side. I'll put a question mark on it, type of thing. So maybe as like just a small my answer to the question, the prophet, well, I guess I haven't been answering this, but in my opinion, the prophet could not be wrong, or should not be wrong, because then he couldn't be guidance for me. I need the prophet to be someone that, if there's a flaw, I need to look into myself to try to figure it out, because otherwise everything just loses its like value, or it all gets tainted. Like, what can I start trusting? So the prophet, if this prophet should be guidance for me, can not have flaws, and he must be a human. And yeah, humans make mistakes, but this prophet should be a human that is being guided to not make those mistakes. But he's a human in terms of needs and impotence and those aspects. But I would like him to be guidance for me, and not like live in a wrong way, not live in contradiction. And those are just some things I was thinking about.
Thank you, Abdurrahman, for those reflections. So Abdurrahman, in his closing remark, was saying that for him, a prophet can't be one that offers mistakes or error. Like, there shouldn't be error in his acting or speech, because I am to look for guidance in that. Okay, Brother Yusuf, you also had your hand up. Please continue.
Also in this 11th principle, he gave the example of a dream. Somebody who is in the dream cannot interpret his own dream. He is in need of somebody awake to interpret the dream. And if you guys have watched Inception, which dream? Dreams inside dreams. And the person who in the dream thinks that he is awake. So who is dreaming, who is awake? So a lot of things, you can make a lot of philosophy about that. You can make a blockbuster, good movie about this. But I guess the gist of the main question is, do I have a conclusion that I am sleeping and that there must be someone awake? The rest is easy. So likewise, I am faulty, I admit that, but am I convinced that there must be someone who doesn't make such mistakes? There must exist such people. And that, I guess this is again the harder part of the job. And then I go and say that, okay, I will sit in front of that person, submit to that person in a sense, because, for example, I have submitted to my PhD advisor and said that, okay, this person knows the field and I am totally oblivious to what to go after. And he will show me a spot for me to dig, and I will dig, and then I will find a treasure there. Do I feel the same towards the position of prophethood? This is why I wanted to make the distinction. So can prophethood be questioned? But again, I see that there are two different meanings of this questioning. Let's separate it. And maybe I should instead use the word criticized, meaning that do I have any slight feeling or impression or idea that this guy doesn't know what he is saying, or this guy is faulty, or this guy is also sleeping? In terms of prophethood, not necessarily a single person that is sitting in this position, but in general. Because if I have such a conclusion, then what Nursi says here makes sense. But it looks like my philosopher mind is objecting to that. My philosopher mind doesn't accept possibility of such a thing, saying, and this is very much again related to what is my understanding about truth And how much do I philosophize even about the word truth? Because I can dodge such questions the way I was asking based on how I am sort of evaluating truth. I don't know if the things that I am saying is making any sense. Still, I am trying to avoid a direct answer. Let's see.
Thank you, Brother Yusuf. Brother Birkan, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to highlight the point here, which in text it says, just as the Quran has obscure verses which are in need of interpretation or else require absolute submission, hadiths also contain difficulties like the obscurities of Quran. They are sometimes in need of extremely careful expounding interpretation. So it is hadith, the narrations, that require expanding and interpretation. And when he talks about the prophet in the reminder of the text, he talks about a specific aspect of the prophet, which is like the prophet, not a man. But the prophet was also a man, right? But here he's talking about his being a narrator of the, or interpreter of the reality. O man stupefied by the sleep of heedlessness and philosophy, do not deny in your dream what one saw. And then he qualifies the one, but what one saw and interpret. So this is the thing that you shouldn't deny. Otherwise, I guess we shouldn't take questions like whether prophet can be wrong or right. So yes, he can be, for instance, wrong about what vegetables to plant on what side of the earth. And companions may come and warn him, for instance, you shouldn't plant them there, instead here, because it's more suitable for them. He might be wrong, for instance, in that regard. He might be wrong about whom to ask help and might get stoned. Or he might be, I don't know, wrong about the dress code to attend the event. So there are many things that he might be wrong within the aspect, within the scope of his own servancy, his own being servant, abd. It's his own journey. He's a human. He might be wrong, he might be right. But when it comes to what he narrates me about reality, about revelation, about my connection with the Creator, my sustainer, about what is wrong, what is right, in terms of, again, not which soil is best to raise tomato. He might be wrong about that, but he wouldn't be wrong about the best way to approach tomato so that I will know my Creator, my sustainer. So the mistakes or the failure of the being wrong, being true, right, it's not about his own life, his own the human aspect, but rather the message he carries, the way he implements this message. This is in question. And also, he doesn't say that just submit them. He doesn't say do not question them. He says do not deny them. There's a difference, right? So without questioning, you cannot submit. That's for sure. Without questioning, you cannot even know what he meant. He comes and tells you about the ox and fish. You cannot submit such an hadith just, without questioning, without trying to understand, without interpretation. You have to interpret, and also the authors encourage this, in need of extremely careful expounding and interpretation. So you have to expound and interpret. So I guess we should be clear about what we mean with he cannot be wrong, or what we mean with absolute submission to whatever he says. I'm sure the Prophet wouldn't expect you to believe that ox can speak just because there's such a narration. You should interpret it. You shouldn't deny it.
Thank you, Brother Birkan. So some of what I'm getting from your comment is that we have to be more precise, perhaps, in how we're posing the question and trying to answer it. In that, if there is a prophet across from me, I mean, the notion of a prophet, I guess, definitionally, is that he is not flawed in terms of the consciousness of the Creator, right? He kind of exemplifies that, how to be conscious of the Creator in everyday life, perhaps. But, I mean, this does not negate the fact of the matter that, he might make mistakes in terms of other everyday life matters, rather matters that require a sort of disciplinary expertise or experience, and as you said, like planting a tomato or something like the seed or something like that. So I also need to refine for myself the question of, in what way am I expecting perfect guidance from the Prophet? That's some of what I'm getting, but I know that may be incomplete. Brother Yusuf, go ahead.
So I guess even if it is planting of tomato or doing anything, so I need to refine my thinking of why would I plant a tomato as a human? Why would my Creator want me to, or create me in a creation in which I am supposed to plant a tomato? So in this regard, whatever messenger does, it must have been correct. Even if from a, let's say, worldly point of view, the tomato is planted to the wrong soil, still if I were to observe that scene, still I would be able to extract the meaning of, or I should be extract to meaning of, I am trying to, as if, knock the door of sustainer with this action. And messenger must have been doing this action in that form. So regardless of its, again, separating it, worldly consequences or aspects of it, there shouldn't be any flaw in this regard. Because it's a little bit tricky to separate Prophet's personal journey from the messengerhood aspect of it, because Prophet is also a teacher to me with his personal journey. Like in his ubudiyah, in his worshipping, he is also a teacher to me. So if I only take it as he is a teacher to me from revelation, it's not that clear of a separation to me, honestly, because his silence, even his silence, or his speech, the way he walks, the way he treats people, everything in this regard is going to be a teaching to me or to anyone who had been observing. So in this regard, how shall I approach messenger? And this is why in all the narrations, the approach of companions were, whenever they were asked, or the messenger was asking them a question, their response was, oh, messenger of God knows better. So this sort of an attitude is the important part. But still, at some point, they ask the question, is this a revelation or is this your opinion, or God's messenger? So then when he says, well, this is my understanding, then they say, well, can it be like this? Then they put their expertise. But again, this is for, from a worldly point of view, shall I plant the soil to here or there? But still the gist of it would stay the same. I agree with that, as Brother Birkan beautifully put it. But this shouldn't take me to the other extreme, that in his every day-to-day action, even when planting the tomato, I mean, this hypothetical example of planting the tomato seed to the wrong soil would have been guidance for me, must have been guidance for me. When the messenger was going through, must have been going through this experience, there must have been a proper and correct message to me. Otherwise, I would be reluctant to sit in front of this messenger. Yes, again, not to say that what had been said was wrong. I shouldn't be asking the wrong question to the messenger, saying that where shall I plant the soil? But rather I should be asking from him or expecting an answer from him in regards to, why do I plant tomato to the soil? What does my Creator want me to understand from this relationship? And the answer that the messenger would give would be correct, and or must be correct. And if I have this understanding, then with certainty or with security, with a trust relationship, I will go and ask to that person. Otherwise, Prophet would become another philosopher for me. So this is, I guess, something that nowadays I'm trying to remind myself, because otherwise, although I might come up with a nice theoretical description of the messenger, there's no room practically of messenger in my day-to-day life, because I'm a philosopher. And by philosopher, I mean, I know things, I understand things. But if I get to this other stage, I might be repeating the things that we have been talking for the last couple of weeks. But if I feel like, no, I am being taught, and messenger was being taught, and messenger was protected from people. This is what sinlessness means. So he was protected. He has been given. I am being given. So as much as I understand this passive aspect of, or passive role of me in the creation, I don't create anything. I am the recipient, as was the main point in the 11th principle. So, was 11th or no, 10th principle? So then I would say that, okay, let me ask, or in this creation, my maker gave to some people, some messengers, and they are giving in the name of the Creator. They don't give in the name of themselves. This is a very important point, actually. The author is studying this message in the very first word. He says, don't take from those who doesn't give in the name of God. This is the concluding sentence of the first word, if you remember. He says, so we should give in the name of God, take in the name of God, and we shouldn't take from those who doesn't give in the name of God. Which means, when I'm going to take answers from someone, I should be seeking answers from those who give in the name of God. The messenger is such people, or must be such people. Such people must exist, which in the language of Quran is called Anbiya. I will find them, I will sit in front of them, and we'll try to understand what they are saying. And if I do not understand, what will I do? I will say it's my fault. Otherwise, I would blame that person. So why shall I blame myself?
Thank you, Brother Yusuf. So along the lines of what he was saying, you know, just if the messenger plants a seed into the soil, there must also be a sort of guidance in the process of that, or in how I can connect that certain activity into context that concerns my reality. And I guess connecting, you know, with the first word, which we're having discussions of on Saturday mornings, giving and taking in the name of God, and realizing that the prophet is one by definition who must be one that gives in the name of God. Yeah, just one thing that I was thinking of, and this isn't necessarily a follow-up to what was said, but you know, like I'm definitely in need of guidance in my life, and I need a teacher, and the prophet is presented as one that can be a teacher to me in terms of allowing me to understand and extract meaning in this world. It's just that, you know, hadith, for example, like I don't have experience of the prophet firsthand, right? In that he's not alive. It's like 14,050 years ago or something like that, in which he was alive in a totally different era. And so I'm trying to extract guidance from his behavior and the way he's acting and speaking through just like these records, which even if they're accurate, you know, it's still very, very much so secondhand, I guess. And I was just thinking, you know, when it comes to teaching, even having a teacher teach me something through Zoom is so much more different than having it in person, live, dynamically. And so, you know, it makes me wonder the extent to which, how can I make the teachings of the prophet more effective to me by virtue of the fact that it is through my interaction with these texts that I'm trying to learn from him, rather than, you know, someone that's living, breathing right in front of me. And I know that's sort of a different vein of thought, but it was just something that occurred to me. Yeah. I do want to, so Brother Yusuf already kind of went into this sleeping and dream example that Nursi was offering, but I'm also a little confused by some of, maybe we can try to expound further on what he's saying here. So he says, yes, someone who is awake interprets the dream of another who is sleeping, and sometimes one who is sleeping hears the words spoken by those near him who are awake, but gives them a meaning and interprets them in a way that applies to his own world of sleep. So in the latter example, sometimes speech can be distorted by the one who is sleeping, because the meaning that's given to them is one that is within the framework of his own world of sleep, right? But as far as he's concerned, it's very accurate and true and in alignment with the reality that he's experiencing. But then he says, O man stupefied by the sleep of heedlessness and philosophy, do not deny in your dream what one saw. So who is that one referring to, first of all? I mean, it's capitalized, but I was a little confused. Like, this sentence in general is a little strange in terms of its structure. Do not deny in your dream what one saw, who manifested the meaning of his eye never wavered nor did swerve, and my eye sleeps but my heart sleeps not. And who was truly awake and aware. Interpret it. So I don't know, just any help in terms of this sentence specifically would be appreciated. I see Brother Birkan's hand is up. Please go ahead.
I was looking at the Turkish. There it just, the text only says zat. Olan zatın. So it's just a person. It's nothing about the being a capital he or anyway, like he's just a person. Do not deny deny let me see. Yes, do not deny what this person who is, worthy of this verse and the narration, do not deny what he saw, but instead try to interpret it. And with this person, at least from the verse and the narration, I understand the prophet, or you can take it as do not deny the person, or you can take this person even as I, like I in terms like meaning my tools to see. Do not deny what these eyes saw, which qualifying eyes, which never was mistaken or went astray. So do not deny what such eyes saw. And the way I understand from the text is clearly referring to the prophet.
Okay, thank you. That helps, but I'm still very confused with it. Yeah, Brother Yusuf, you wanted to say something? And then Mohammed Said, you can speak right after.
I talked too much today. Let's, if you don't mind, let's hear Mohammed Said, and then if he leaves anything to say, then I can say. Is that okay, dear moderator?
I mean, yes, go ahead, Mohammed Said.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is a question I am also interested in. As far as I understand, I would like to summarize the question, that a personality, a person which is in history, but me living here and now, and how can I benefit from, from this far from him. One of the things that came to that is given to me right now is that even the possibility, as the Quran, I think, or as I understand from the verse of the Quran that is highlighted here, that the possibility of a person who lived 24/7 according to his reality, that he represents that that potential in me, but it is realized. I know it is far from me in time-wise, but knowing it, that it is realized and everyone observed it, and through his sayings, as far as I see, it is there that his even when he does a mistake in his practical life, he was using it as an occasion to claim his reality as a created being and connect to the absolute beauty and absolute source of perfection. So in that sense, also his mistake, I think Yusuf was highlighting this point, that in practical life can become an example for me. So historically, yes, I am far from him, but it is there as a personality. I know it is there. That I think this knowing is very important for me, for a human being to have such a person in his life, although time-wise it is so far from him. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed Said, for that contribution to this discussion. Brother Yusuf, you can go ahead now.
So for what I understand from the metaphor of this dreaming and whatnot. So when I hear a narration, which is an interpretation or supposed to be an interpretation of the life that I'm living, I can criticize it, saying that this doesn't make sense. And the author is saying that this is because you are in a dream. Dream meaning that you have an alternative worldview which is far from reality. And in your dream, when you hear the interpretation or what an awake person is seeing, because he is explaining what he is seeing, how he is seeing this existence, the truth of existence, in your dream, you hear it very distorted. And the example he gives is as if a mosquito is biting you, but you feel like, oh, I am being, like weapons or guns are being shot at me. So he says, you are that much alien to the messenger's world and worldview. So it is the distortion is because of you, not because of the message that is being presented. So you are the one that is living in a totally upside down world. And this is because of your philosophy and heedlessness. So this is why he says, blame yourself and fix yourself rather than criticizing the narrations. And this is after 10th principle, because up to 10th principle, at the end, at the conclusion, he said that even if there seems to be a mistake within the narration, go and blame or evaluate it through the filters of 10. But now at the 11th, as if I am still at a level that I would like to challenge the content of a message, which is filtered through the 10. As if somebody is going to bring up another narration and say that, okay, none of the 10 that 10 principles is answering this. This seems to be a very sound, correct, and yeah, even from where are you going to interpret this? I mean, from which part of it, as if I try to pull, it just collapses. I don't know, this was a bad translation of a Turkish term. So how am I going to make sense of this at all? This is totally wrong, I would say. But author is saying that this is because you are living in a dream world. Dream world in the sense that you lost the true scale of truth. According to you, white is black, black is white. And this is why when you hear somebody talking about white, you say, oh, it's black, well, but black, it doesn't make any sense. He says, because this is because of your mindset being distorted. This is what I understand, if it makes sense.
Thank you. That's really helpful, actually. You know, just understanding this analogy in terms that the dream, as far as I'm concerned, is that I'm in a worldview, as you said, that is far from reflecting the true nature of reality. And so, you know, I'm in my own sort of self-distorted understanding of existence. But I know that analogies have their limits, of course, but insofar as the sleeping person is concerned, I mean, in her experience, she's being truthful to her experience. She's experiencing guns and rifles, and so she's saying that it's guns and rifles. She doesn't necessarily have access to the nature of reality when she is sleeping. Now, of course, I mean, this brings up the question perhaps then of, do I have access to understanding the true nature of things, the true reality of things, whatever that means? Because what kind of slumber am I so submerged in that my understanding is so different from the understanding that let's say, hadith are presenting. I feel like this raises questions of responsibility and accountability, and yeah, I'm just thinking about it. Brother Birkan, go ahead.
I personally believe that such discussions regarding the questions that you just articulated, such discussions can be done, and we can find answers without necessarily committing to ourselves to any, let's say, metaphysical, ontological, whatever you want to call, structure of the reality, whether we have access to truth, whether we have not access to truth, whatever. Like, regardless of your take, regardless of your position, I guess we can still discuss such matters, and we can still benefit from such matters. So how we can do is just knowing ourselves. I guess that's the only necessary part, being honest to ourselves and being aware of our expectations. So at the very beginning, I was just checking after reading the part, this 11th principle again, the 5th times, I just asked the question, whom he's talking about? Is he talking about, the unbelievers? Is he talking about hypocrites? Who is the audience for these principles? And it's interesting, he's talking about scholars. If you look at the very beginning of the 3rd branch, he says, since the hadith that speak of signs of the end of time, the events at the end of time, and the merits and the rewards of certain actions have not been well understood, some scholars, ahli ilm, some scholars who rely on their reason have pronounced some of them to be either weak or false. So he started criticizing this attitude, and as an antidote, he started listing these principles. So there are a few parts in the text, in these principles. He's specifically talking about some groups of unbelievers, atheists, and so on. And he indicates that, he says, for instance, some atheists say, where are the tribes that perform these extraordinary acts, whatever. But other than that, this part is talking about he's talking to scholars. So what I mean with the scholars, he talks about people like ourselves, for instance. I'm not claiming that we are scholars, but in the sense that the people who are trying to find guidance, people who are aware of their own weaknesses, their own necessities, trying to find guidance, and people who also know what a messenger should mean, at least people who should know what a messenger should mean, and people who should know what is at stake when you deny a messenger, and people who should know how to approach a messenger, what to expect from a messenger. So again, regardless of your, let's say, philosophical attitude against truth, against your access to truth, you should be aware that you, Birkan, are in a sleep. You are in a dreamy world in which you know that you cannot make sense of things. You know that what you see is not the reality that you are striving for. you know that you fail all the time, and you have expectation of someone who sees and who does not go astray. You have this expectation of someone who sees the reality, whatever it means to you, whatever it means for you from your philosophical perspective, doesn't matter. Whether it is the truth, whether it is the best truth someone can achieve, doesn't matter. But you have this expectation as a scholar, as a person who is trying to learn, who is honest to himself, herself, that you have expectation of a pair of eyes that do not go astray. And while this is the case, he says, while this is your expectation, while this is your definition of your prophet, how can you deny? If this is what prophet for you, then you should take his narrations as something to be interpreted. If you don't see the sense, if you don't see the wisdom, if you don't see the meaning right away, know that they should be interpreted. Why? Because the prophet for you is someone whose eyes do not go astray, who may sleep, whose eyes, and another metaphor now, the eye represents something else, whose eye may sleep, but whose heart wouldn't sleep. This is your expectations. This is your definition of a prophet, right? I say yes. Okay, then when you see a hadith narration that you do not make sense, try to interpret it. Try to take it into your world and see how it fits your world. Know that you, as a person, always fail. Know that you are in a dream. Know that you don't have access to the reality that you want to have access. So this is how I understand.
سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.